Hi, everyone. Welcome to How Branding Helps Your Ideal Clients Choose You Every Time. And this is the first part of our brand clinic, which is a way for you to really think about your brand uh, methodically and work out what's working and what's not, and then ask us some questions about it. So, as you have seen on our webpage, the first thing to do is kind of watch this video and get an introduction to branding, how it works, how we think about it, and then fill in your own self audit. Finally, attend one of our brand clinics, which happen once a month. So, first off, we wanted to introduce ourselves before we get to the kind of the main content. I'm Georgina. I'm a brand and marketing strategist with Alkimie. And so my part is really helping you identify your strengths, helping you identify your audience and what matters to them, and then creating messaging around it so that you can articulate that. And all of that stuff, I then hand over to Gilly, our art director and graphic designer in the team.
So hi everybody, I'm Geely, and as Georgina mentioned, the art director and lead designer for Alkimie. And as we say, we are strategy first. So of course that means sorting out who you are as a business, who your audience is, before we actually get to designing your brand. So as Georgina said, once she works out strategy with a client, that gets handed over to me and we actually build out the visual brand around that foundation. So we're not shooting in the dark. It's not just pretty pictures. Your visual branding is actually a powerful communication tool.
And the reason we believe so strongly in this is that classic know, like, and trust journey that clients have to go on before they work with you. And so, really, a strong brand is an essential part of building that trust. When you're clear, when you're confident, and when you're aligned with what your business really represents, people get that. It's much easier to say, yes, that's my person and that's who I want to work with when they can really understand your brand clearly. And so that's the bit that we want to work on. So today we're going to cover what branding means. Often in marketing, we hear the term brand and we're not sure quite what it is. And a lot of people think about logos and color palettes, but it's so much more. When branding makes you the obvious choice for clients and how that really helps build trust, when your brand can let you down and what that looks like, because you might not have identified your brand as the problem, but you might be experiencing some of the symptoms. Then we just want to tell you a little bit about our approach to branding, and then as a next step in this process, how you can test your brand. So for us, the brand is basically the whole experience of your company. So it includes not only who you are, but also who your audience is, because we're never working in a vacuum. We're always interacting with the people we're trying to reach. And so your brand has to be created within the context of them. And then there's your competitors who you want to stand out from. So it's kind of, it's needs to be authentic to who you are, but also within the context of what else is going on. So we talk about the brand soul, who you are and what you believe, and that's your mission, vision, values, and all those good things, because that's the bit that should be true to you. But your brand also needs to appeal to your target audience. So you really need to have a deep understanding of who they are. And all of that together builds to how people experience your brand. And that's not just the kind of the visuals in terms of like the logo, the color palette, it's also the website, it's also how you write your content. It's kind of if you have a shop front, the experience people have coming into your space. So it's kind of everything around that. Gilly, is there anything you'd like to add about kind of what brand means?
Yeah, I think one of the primary things I think about, particularly from the visual branding perspective, and I think this is something that business owners, it's kind of a little bit of a trap that can fall into, and it's very common, which is to misunderstand the purpose of your branding, particularly the visual part of it, which is that it's not really so much about what you like, it's about what's going to communicate the essence of your brand to your audience. And that, of course, you still need to like your brand, obviously, you need to feel good about it. That's really, really important, but that's not the primary purpose of it. And so when we get into developing visual brand, what we're most interested in is, again, this brand soul with your audience, that intersection, so that the brand really becomes its own independent entity, separate from you. And if you're a micro business owner in particular, that's a really important distinction because sometimes it's hard to separate that out, but that the brand is its own entity. So we want business owners to think about their brand less as being about something they like and more about something that is the communication tool that reaches their audience.
So, what does it look like when branding makes you the obvious choice? And here we wanted to share some examples of work with our clients that we've done to really make them stand out, but also create a brand that is true to them. And this one's a really fun one. Therapy with Jolene is a relation. Jolene is a relationship therapist, but she used to actually be an executive coach and kind of bit more of a business advisor. And so she retrained and became a therapist. And so there are a couple of things that are really important to her brand in this instance, as a service business, as a therapist who is working with people who are in pain, like they have to be very comfortable with her as a person. So her personality comes across really strongly here. And we have to create a warm and welcoming environment as kind of a therapist. However, there were some personal touches we wanted to bring in. So, for example, one of the first things that Jolene said to me when we were working through her brand strategy is that she thinks of herself as a mullet, which is an unusual thing to say anyway, but she very much feels that she sort of encapsulates this like business at the front, party at the back mentality, because she is professional and she is sensitive and empathetic and all those things that a therapist needs to be, but she's also fun. And she brings a levity to difficult situations and uses humor to connect with people. And so we didn't want it to be too kind of too overly sensitive. We wanted to bring some of that robustness of spirit she has and some of that fun, which was then sort of reflected in the visuals, like that logo where we have the business up front with the therapy with, and then the Jolene, which is in sort of a signature style. So that kind of play, but it's also how we chose the colors. And Giddy, I'd like you to speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So, I guess following what I just said about, your brand really is its own entity separate from you. It can, there's a bit of a spectrum on that. In this case, right, with somebody who's a therapist, clearly she is the product, right? So somebody, when you're choosing a therapist, who they are is incredibly important, right? That you're likely choosing them largely because you feel comfortable with them. So everything that Georgina just described is spot on. We were trying to sort of balance out this professional, trustworthy with also friendly, approachable, a little bit lighter. As far as her color palette, this is very Jolene. That was actually it was inspired by a number of things. One was we discussed sort of what does her dream office look like? So she was already thinking about the environment that she wants to invite her patients into. How would she dress as a therapist, right? Like what does that even look like? Because again, those are all brand decisions, particularly in such a high touch profession, right, where the encounter with the therapist is the thing and their space is all part of that experience. So those are really important things to consider. And then Jolene's personality. So she is a very warm person, and these colors really do reflect her. And in fact, when we finished this, she had shown it to a few other people, and they said, "That's you," right? Which is great to hear from people who are not necessarily even patients. It's just people who know her and immediately could kind of feel her essence through this particular palette.
So we wanted to create, and we did create something that was true to her, that would also appeal to her audience. And in that way, when people go to her website, they know immediately who she is. And either they vibe with it or they don't. And that's kind of the strength of a strong brand, that people can make that decision really easily. And because that experience with her is going to be consistent through her website, her office, the interactions with her, it's easier to build that trust because all of this is very genuine. So this is a very different example, much more kind of straight-laced for a more of a business to business service, but still with a little bit of a twist.
Yeah, so this particular client, he's sort of in financial space, obviously works as a consultant, and you can probably tell immediately that this is a very cut and dry kind of consultancy, and that you can probably immediately tell without even seeing anything relating to financial on here that this is a financially oriented business because the colors sort of already say that. And we know this because blue in particular is very much an expected color in that particular industry. It's also very masculine, so you can probably sort of guess right off the bat that this is a business run by a man. Um, Not that that is necessarily the most important thing, but again, if you're a solo consultant, that generally comes through as well. So everything about this, right? It's very structured. It's very neat. There's some things that are sort of expected, which within this industry, um, trust is highly important. So you actually don't want to get too crazy, right, with the branding. Like we weren't going to do purple or something that was just completely unexpected because people need to feel secure off the bat. And so anything particularly in the financial realm, we sort of try to keep it a little bit safer because that is what clients are expecting. And that is immediately going to make them feel a little bit more trustworthy, even if they're talking to somebody for the very first time. And again, with this palette, largely what we looked at were a lot of images of like corporate buildings, guys in suits. You can sort of already picture that. Um, the lowercase application in the logo was our one sort of piece of like, let's just make this a little bit friendlier. Like it doesn't have to be so buttoned up, right? So we just kind of wanted to bring in something a little more modern, a little more easygoing in that regard, just to balance that out. But otherwise, you can see this is very different from Jolene. This is a much more kind of buttoned up, in some ways less personal brand, right? It's more about the service that he's offering in an industry that requires a very high level of trust.
Mm. So it's kind of bringing again what resonates with clients, what they expect, but being very sort of consistent and true to his actual approach. We have a final example, which is kind of a nice mix of the two and halfway between. So this is a consultancy that works with all sorts of businesses, but it's basically kind of ensuring that the bacterial level of things are federally compliant. So he has a large range of clients. But when we were working with this brand, we wanted to really kind of strike a middle ground. We wanted it to be professional and sort of taken seriously. He's got lots of letters after his name. He's an expert in what he does, but he didn't want it to be overly masculine or anything because he wants it to be kind of neutral, but with a bit of fun and personality because he wanted it to just be a bit different and stand out.
Yeah, so I don't know that we named this. So this particular client is actually a microbiologist. And as Georgina said, he works with businesses basically dealing with bacterial levels. It's actually more exciting than it sounds. He works with food companies and supplement companies. So products essentially that you may encounter in your day-to-day life. Um, but he didn't want to come off as like a stodgy, boring scientist. He did want it to be, again, more approachable, more fun. And as Georgina mentioned, he is working with both men and women, and so he didn't want anyone to feel. I guess he wanted to appeal right to a mass audience, a range of people. Um, and largely what we looked at in designing this were petri dishes and, electrodes and all these things. And, the thing is, when you really start digging into that stuff, it looks like this. Like it has these kind of colors, right? So science is not boring. It's actually quite colorful and fun. And he wanted that to, kind of come through in his branding. And again, as Georgina said, it still needed to look professional. It still needed to be easily accessible, but but a little bit fun.
So what happens when your brand lets you down? And we didn't want to name and shame, because we didn't think that was fair. But what we want to do instead is just talk about some of the symptoms that you might be feeling that can stem from a brand that maybe isn't as strong as it could be. And so we've got various people who are feeling various things. And what does this look like? Okay, so if you're getting clients who are shopping by price, it's because they don't understand the value that you bring at a higher price. They don't understand what makes you different to everybody else, and they're just looking at deliverables and price, and that's a race to the bottom. So that's kind of the game that we're trying to get out of by building a brand that they can go, okay, I get why I should pay for you, even if you're twice as much as the next person, because I understand the value. If you think your branding looks like everybody else in the industry and it's just very stereotypical and people don't see that there's even a little bit of difference, then that can be tough because then they're not sure, okay, well, what is the difference? If you're not getting the right clients, that's a real kind of red flag and sort of warning signal, because maybe your brand isn't appealing to the people you want to target. Maybe it's kind of appealing to a lower kind of priced audience. Maybe it's appealing to slightly the wrong audience, or maybe it's too broad. So those are some things to consider. If you avoid sending people to your website, which a lot of small businesses do, then that's a pretty clear signal that it needs to work. And if you're kind of always scrambling with your marketing and you feel like things are a bit ad hoc and disjointed, and if you look at your social media feed, it looks a bit uneven, then that is also an indication that your brand isn't clear because it's not consistent.
So I'm going to kind of address all these same issues, but from the visual brand perspective, because Georgina sort of sort of hinted at there's something missing, right? There's some foundational piece that might be missing if you're running into any one of these issues or multiple issues or any issues that aren't even here. And these are some really common ones, which is why we named them. But from a visual perspective, right? If I'm mostly getting clients who are shopping by price only. I mean, that very much speaks to probably some underlying strategic issue, maybe in messaging. But from a visual perspective, it might be visually, are you presenting yourself as a quality brand or a luxury brand or just simply a brand that is not, quote, cheap, right? Like the branding says it. So there could be something visual going on there that's just not sending the right cues to the right people. My branding looks just like everyone else in my industry. This is very, very common. Because there are trends in design and people start to follow them, especially in the age of social media where you're seeing the same things over and over and over again. You sort of just subconsciously say, well, if I'm in the wedding industry, this is what wedding branding looks like. Or, if I'm in the financial industry, this is what financial branding looks like. It is true that there are some things that people expect. And again, kind of referring back to the EPBM example, especially with like the financial industry, there are some things that just do establish trust right away and a level of comfort right away, but it does not mean we have to be cookie cutters and that we have to do the same thing that everyone's doing. And in fact, one of the biggest sort of stumbling blocks here is that things go out of style. So that is true with clothing, that is true with branding. So if you're following something that's like really trendy, within a few years, that's going to look outdated. So part of what we try to do is really make sure that your brand is very authentic to you, so it stays in style longer. So that's one thing to really consider. I'm not getting the right clients, kind of similar to the I'm mostly getting clients for shopping by price only. Again, there could be some visual cues there that are missing. Maybe there's something about the colors that you're using. Maybe there's something about the fonts. Maybe there's just something about all of it that's just not really communicating the right message. And so we want to dig into that and examine what needs to change. I avoid sending prospects to my website. As Georgina said, this is actually really, really common. And this can really hurt your business, right? Because you don't, if you're avoiding, right, you're potentially losing clients. And what I've seen with this is it's usually something about the design of the site. It could be the messaging, but it's usually the design, that there's something about it that the client or the business owner feels uncomfortable with. Like it's not accurately reflecting their brand, or it's not accurately reflecting sort of the soul of their brand, who they are, something, or it's outdated. So something's just making them uncomfortable. If you're finding that you're doing that, that you are hesitant to send someone to your website, really pause and ask yourself what's going on. Like, what is it that you're feeling? Because that will help start to answer the question about what needs to be changed to eliminate that issue. And then I'm always scrambling with my marketing. It's an inconsistency issue usually, and there is perhaps not an established set of brand guidelines. Brand guidelines help eliminate this issue, so you always know what colors you're using, you always know what fonts you're using, you always know what messaging you're using. And while those things get rearranged, right, especially if we're talking about social media or printed materials, um, this is what establishes that consistency, and the consistency is what establishes trust. So you do not want to be just randomly throwing things at the wall when you're putting your marketing out there, because you are sending out a message that says, I don't know who I am. And that is what loses trust with your potential clients.
So how do we approach branding? We wanted to just kind of give you an outline of the process, as well as sort of the goals and the results and the benefits and everything. So ours is kind of three steps. Um, First off, it's really thinking about you and who you are, and creating that identity, as well as creating sort of audience personas, things like that, to identify who your audience is, so that we can start building out brand messaging. And that looks like your key messages, your unique value proposition, all of those things, so that you can articulate in words kind of what makes you special. And those bits are critical for when you're then writing a website or pretty much any marketing activity. But that's also the basis of what we then hand over to Gilly for art direction and design, because she can't do her work if she doesn't know who you are and who your audience is and what your personality is, because all of that is what's essential for a visual brand.
As we like to say, we actually use this analogy, that this is sort of the building the house, right? So the brand identity and the brand messaging are the foundations of your house. And without that, you cannot build the rest of the house, right? Like you don't have the scaffolding in place um, to actually have that whole structure. So those pieces are what create that scaffolding, that structure, and then we can put the walls around it, the paint, the windows, all of those aesthetic choices. But we first have to have the bones, right, to build around.
In a little bit more depth, because you might be like, okay, but what do I get for that? So when we talk about brand identity creation, and this is that analysis of you and your audience, so your mission, vision, values, mission, otherwise known as purpose, things like that. But okay, what are you trying to do in the world? Your personality and tone of voice is super, super important for when it comes to writing things later on, and when it comes to kind of the visual design aspect, because that's one of the things that'll help you stand out. Often with service businesses, it's not necessarily what we do, but it's how we do it that can be different. And how we talk about it is one of those things that can make us stand out. When you can say the same thing in 5 different ways, but which way is it that's true to you is important. Then your ideal client profile, kind of what is that umbrella overarching client that you're looking for, and then what are the sub personas in that, because inevitably you have an ideal client that you want to reach, but there might be some differences, some subtle nuances between the kinds of people they are. Anything you want to say on this one, Kelly?
No, I think go ahead. I'll wrap it up when we get to the visual part.
Sure. So all of that foundational stuff, who you are, who your audience is, now we start to take into account kind of, okay, what's the context we're operating in when it comes to the competitors? Because we want to make you stand out. And it is a Venn diagram, but a bit of an unusual one because you don't want to be saying the same things as your competitors. You want to be saying what's true to you and what your audience wants to hear, but also not necessarily saying all the same things as everybody else. Inevitably there are a few things that just kind of hygiene factors that everybody has to say. But what are the things that you can say that really will make you special? And so looking at your competitors then allows us to create a unique value proposition. What is the key thing that makes you different? And then create key messages around that. So those things are really important when it comes to writing websites or writing pretty much any marketing content or creating any marketing content, because these are the things that you want people to know about before they work with you. So this isn't necessarily something that Giddy needs so much for the digital visual design aspect, but when I write websites for my clients, it is the key messages, the unique value proposition, the tone of voice, the personality, as well as like the visual value stuff. That's the stuff that I am going to be using to write that website because that is what you want to communicate. And then over to Gilly.
So, as you can see, because we've sort of repeated this point multiple times in this presentation, it really is the key point, right? Which is this is a chain link situation, right? Like strategy leads to messaging, leads to the visual brand. And these things link together to create this whole answer, right, to what your branding is. And each piece builds on the previous piece. So when we get to brand identity creation, the other thing to understand about all this is there's a lot of psychology behind it. So it's just to sort of get into how do we get to this? How do we develop the logo and the color and choose typography and all of those things? It's based on everything that you've already learned about your business going through the strategy process, right? So we're uncovering a lot of psychological components, like about who you are as a business and who your audience is. So how do we make these decisions about what the logo should look like, the color, etc.? It's based on everything we just learned and what we understand about the psychology of your business and the psychology of the people you're trying to reach. So colors, fonts, all these things have emotional resonance, right? So part of my job is if you say you are, again, let's use financial industry, right? High trust, we know certain colors and certain kinds of fonts communicate high trust and they communicate authority and they communicate stability, right? So if those are really important, then we have to be leaning into that and choosing the colors and the fonts and all the elements that communicate those things. Now, for example, we're currently working with somebody in the financial industry who has a slightly different bent on how she works with her clients. And while high trust is going to still be super important, she's got this like slightly different like vibe, right? She's got some kind of an artistic bent to what she does and the kinds of people that she works with. So we're going to incorporate that into this, right? So we're looking at maybe a slightly different kind of color palette, but still making sure that it makes people feel safe and secure and that she has authority in that space. So those are the things that we're thinking about. It's not like we're just randomly picking colors right out of the ether. It's like we know what color theory without going down that whole rabbit hole, what certain colors communicate, what certain styles of fonts communicate, and then we tie all that together to create this visual presentation that helps get that point across to the people you're trying to reach.
So what comes next in this little process? Well, next is the self-audit, which you'll find on our webpage. And that is to really test your brand and all the parts of it. So we've kind of broken down how we think of branding. And so we've also broken down in this test what we want you to go through and think very methodically about your brand. And then once you've done that, you can join our brand clinic, which is a free 1 hour session we're running once a month. And it's really an opportunity for you to ask any questions after you've filled in the self audit to find out kind of I'm weak in this area, or I'm not sure about this. What do you think about that? And we would love to answer your questions. So on this page, you'll find the a Google Meet link, which is kind of our standard one for every single meeting, and we hope to see you there.
And if you're interested in joining us more than once, you can sign up for email reminders. So we will send out a reminder before each live brand clinic. Um, and we hope we can help answer your brand questions.
Thank you. Hope to see you soon.